Well, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. Actually, I'm really interested in the process of directing an event, really, and I think there's a lot of stuff out there for runners. There's a lot of stuff, how to run an ultra, how to train for an ultra, what shoes to buy. But
Mm.
I was thinking about it, particularly in light of after the conference we went to, that there's not actually that many resources for someone who thinks, well, I've got this great idea, I've got this wonderful route, I'd love to make it into an event, where
Yeah.
there isn't really anywhere, there isn't a how-to manual for how to create a race. So you are one of the most experienced in the UK, and you've run some of the most iconic races, the Lakes in a Day and Northern Traverse, and I know I think you help certainly with your open tracking. You're behind the scenes on a lot of things that we don't even know about probably. So give me a little bit of a history about you and how you started, because you started in adventure racing, which I learned recently about it just this weekend from Joe Faulkner. And I mean, that in itself is a mind-boggling sport.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, an interesting one because adventure racing kind of gave me that background in that when I came into ultra running, gave me a very different perspective on it than what the established approach was. So, and likewise, I did some cycle sportives as well. And again, my take from other sports took a very different approach to it, and it kind of worked. So I think sometimes as a race director, there's a lot to be gained from looking at other sports to see how they do things and when not things can be learned from that. And can you take an approach and use it somewhere else? Because there's a lot of we can't do that, but we can't do that, we can't do that, and you need to be in that little bit of a mindset. It's like, well, can we find a way type
Mm,
thing,
mm,
and if you just take all those I can't do that type thing, you will just never ever run events. You just there's hundreds of reasons why you shouldn't run an event, and there's probably only a couple where you should do it because it's what you want to do. It's a good thing to do. So if you're easily knocked back, then
yeah.
really running events is not, you shouldn't
um,
get into it really, because you will have problems. It's just where people, after some of the big events I've done, particularly the adventure races, people say, what are you worried about? And it's like, it's what I don't know about is what I worry about. To me, it's what I don't know. It's going to come
yeah.
around the corner.
But
But I suppose my history is, I started I mean, my history way back is, I worked in overseas aid relief for 10 years in emergency aid relief, so in war zones around the world. Did that in my 20s, early 30s, and I did a bit of consulting type stuff, and I finished that. I really enjoyed it. Had a great time in the way which you can do in those kind of circumstances, but I did enjoy it. I then came back to the UK, realised that that's not a job for life, and I was doing an MBA at the time, a Master of Business, because I thought that was kind of be useful in the work which I was doing. Decided to get a little bit more into the outdoor stuff, so went back to my kind of roots as an outdoor instructor, tried to get into training, management training, that kind of stuff. Didn't really work as well as I hoped. Moved to the Lake District. A friend of mine was running some series of events, and he was going away, and he asked me if I could just pick up organising them for a while. So I went to go and do that, and then things changed and I wasn't doing it. And I thought, well, stuff it, I'll go and do my own ones. And that's when Open Adventure started, back in 2005. And those first 3 or 4 years were pretty successful. I got some sponsorship. We were doing some reasonable sized events. I was doing a bit of freelancing for other people. I was still doing my outdoor instructing. I did a bit of work for Spot Island years ago. But then there came a point where, I think it was probably around about 2000 8, 9, and I was getting sponsorship from Adidas, New Balance, North Face, Hagloss or Mountain Hardware. So I was doing pretty well with all these
Mm.
events, working with a lot of brands. Probably still not making any money, but having a good time. And obviously, I went full time and then employed somebody, and that side of things just kept going. And I guess I migrated, did some sportifs, and then did some trail runs for North Face, and just kind of broadened the portfolio, and took the lessons learned. And I think on reflection, it was, whilst I think I learned stuff from one sector to another sector, um, participants didn't always travel between sectors. And I always thought they would, but they didn't really. So somebody who rides a road bike, does a lot of sportives, won't necessarily go off and do an ultra. I mean, I know that there are people, certainly in the top end of what we do, there are the Sabrinas of the world and people like that who will do both. But on the mainstream of participants have their
Mm.
sport.
Mm.
So in effect, it was like starting up a new business each time. But there was a few tricks which I put in there to make things work. And I learned a lot. I lost a lot of money. I learned some, and yeah, we carried on. And then, as well documented, I made the decision. I mean, slowly but surely, open tracking got busier. We separated it out as a company, and then I decided 2 years ago,
Mm.
about a year and a half ago, to stop running events and just concentrate on open tracking. And I think that was just a couple of years of being, I mean, obviously through COVID, but before that, really just being frustrated that I was struggling to run both businesses. Open tracking probably was up to about 3 or 4 employees. I had quite a successful events business, and tried to do both of them at the same time, especially when events, we were tracking stuff on the same weekend as I was doing stuff. I found that really difficult, if things weren't going so well, on either side of the business. I felt myself being torn apart. So I kind of felt like the time was right to
Mm.
stop. And also, I was going to people's events, and I thought, these guys are doing a bit better job than me. And I mean, people say that's probably been harsh, but I think they probably had more time to concentrate on it, and I just didn't have that time, to do it. So I felt like, there was numerous other people out there running events, and there was a few people doing what I was doing in tracking. So
What
I thought,
started
right.
you on the tracking side?
So back in 2000, I think it was 2009, we tried to hire some trackers in for a coast-to-coast adventure race. So it was a multi-sport event across the country. There was a solo version and then a teams version, so a bit of paddling, a bit of running, and a bit of cycling. A 4-day stage event. And I hired some trackers in, and I was just having a nightmare. This company was just awful. They didn't load up all the participants. The maps were rubbish. So we ditched them. It didn't work at all well. It didn't do what we hoped. The following year, I went with another company, based in the UK, and their stuff stopped working in the middle of the night. And I rang them up, and they wanted 600 quid to fix their own server. And I couldn't believe that I was
That's
having this
outrageous.
conversation. I know. It was their own server. It's like, yeah, we can't do anything about that. If you want us to fix it, it costs you 600 quid. And I just realised that I can't believe I'm having this conversation. And then the following year, there was some friends of ours who were part of the Venture Racing World Series who'd had these little tiny trackers down in Australia, and they were trying them out. And I said, look, can I borrow them? And Rob Marriott, who was working for me at the time, said, look, I think we could build our own system. And so we just built the system for, I think it was 2011 or 2012. We built our own tracking system for that event. And very soon after, people started seeing it, because it was obviously, the great thing about tracking, it advertises itself. People saw it and said, look, can we have it on our events? And so we went out, bought our own. It kind of faltered a little bit, but we got it going. And we just we didn't really push it really. It was mainly people, I guess, who knew me from other sports or had seen stuff online, said, look, can we hire your kit and put it on events? I mean, originally it was like 150, 200 trackers. Now we've got 3,000 trackers, so it's kind of it's
And
grown
the
a
largest
lot.
is it GPS tracking events company you can claim?
Yeah, I mean, we don't tend to shout about it like that, but yes, we are. I don't, unless someone can tell me otherwise. We're probably the largest company tracking events. This is the kind of strange world which we live in. So we've got the most trackers, and we've got access probably to another 1,000 through our partners overseas. But still, in the world of GPS tracking, we're small. So you go and talk to the companies which supply this kit, and their world is in vehicle tracking, where they're shifting 100,000 units or 10,000 units. So 2 or 3,000 is just nothing.
Yes.
You go and ask them for a discount, they just kind of like, yeah, not really. They're not going to change the color of it unless I want 20,000 units. It's just not going to happen.
Okay.
So yeah,
Interesting.
so we're the biggest, but we're also playing in a big area. So
Big fish in a small pond, but the sea is quite big.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but I love it really, and I think, and sometimes these companies take an interest because we're pushing their tech. A lot of their stuff is going into vehicles or boats or whatever it is, or motorbikes or electric bikes and stuff like that. Whereas we're trying to squeeze something. We're trying to get a runner to carry something who generally doesn't want to carry anything at all, and something very lightweight, and get it to last 2 or 3 days. So technologically we are pushing it, but I enjoy that, and I enjoy
So you
that
presumably you want them as small as possible, but the size isn't perhaps a necessary consideration that they've got to think about if it's going into vehicles.
No, totally. I mean, well, the big thing is the battery. So, if you've plugged it into a car battery, it's like
Not an issue.
It's not really the amount of current which a tracker drains, whether it's just doesn't really, the differences are minuscule. So the settings can be very different on a car tracker. You can have it, updating every 10, 20 seconds. It doesn't matter. Whereas when you're trying to track something like the Spine Race or the Lakeland 100, then you need that battery to last, and to also cope in places where there's often poor mobile signal or it's very sketchy. So that tracker will work harder, that kind of thing. So there's lots of little, and it's not a pure science either. So you can go and test one tracker and it worked fine, but then you can put 100 out, and then where did people put that tracker? Did they put it in their hip pocket? Did it not work so well? All those kind of things. It's all part of what we do. So
are we going to see a sort of a crash alert option soon? If someone sort of trips over, it'll send an automatic beacon like you get in cars.
I mean, so that technology already exists in a lot of the kit. I'd be surprised if we went that way. Just because I think you just get too many false reading. Everything from somebody dropping their bag on the floor, or that kind of thing. I think it would just trigger it. I don't. I mean, and other race directors would have to kind of tell me if they saw the need for it, but I don't see that there's an indication of us missing stuff because of that. Do you mean where it automates? The thing about technology is that sometimes, or because you can do it, doesn't mean you should, if you see what I mean. So it becomes, there's a danger in our world is that we go chasing down sort of particular routes to try and solve a problem which nobody knew existed.
No, that's fair enough.
So I don't know. I think there are other opportunities. There's other things which we can do. Like, for instance, I think there's probably an argument on, and the tech's not quite there yet, but I think on some of these solo things where someone's got a heart rate monitor on, I think it'd be quite interesting to see what the heart rate is. There's no reason why we couldn't put that on the tracking, live heart rate. That kind of thing. Plot that graph type thing. that would be fascinating information and interesting, in the same way as they do it with power and other things on the Tour de France and stuff. So yeah, I think some of that stuff will come in, but even then, I don't see it being useful on a. I mean, some people might say it's useful, but I don't think it on an event-wide basis. I think more some of the sort of single tracker hire stuff which we do, where we're recording a round or
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I'd be fascinated to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, cool. And sort of going back to events and
Yep.
directing them, would you say that there's a what would you say that someone should look at is the most important thing to look at? They've sort of got this fantastic idea, or I've got this lovely loop that I think would make a great race. What's the sort of first thing they need to consider when thinking about turning it into a race?
So I think there's quite a few things that's coming into my mind when I think about this, and I think the first thing is date, and when do you plan to run it? There's a lot of events which are popping up in September or June, July, a very crowded calendar. You're going to struggle if you're new on the block to get your foot in the door, unless you've got already a big database or you've got a massive sponsor who wants to inject a stack of cash in to promote your event or be the headline of it. So the North Face this, or I don't know, whatever brand it is behind it. So I think it's really hard to get your foot in the door there. And that was behind the Leyton Day. So the Leyton Day was the second weekend in October. It's just because that was the date which I found that I could fit into. I think the other thing which I think people forget when they start out is that they often look at the calendar in their own head of when they would want to start running a race. So they come out Christmas ago, it would be cool to go and do an event in September this year. Now, you need a lot more time to get, and I would say in the UK, especially with the way the market is, I think you need it to promote an event at least a year in advance. Many events. I mean, Shane's already launched 2024 Northern Traverse. He's already said he's going to open entries on this date for next year. So he's already, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure he's already booked venues for that already. So if you roll that back, he's probably started that process 2 or 3 months ago. And that was certainly the case with the Leyton Day. We were looking 18 months to 2 years ahead. But we would often only launch the event actually just the week before the actual current day. I think that can change as you get to shorter events. But Spine Race has obviously been in the news recently. Again, they've opened entries for next year, so it's a year in advance. But if you're going to open entry, especially if it's a new event, you need to have a venue. You need to have pretty much button down the permissions. You need to know how much it's going to cost, how much you're going to charge them, and that needs to be based on some kind of like budget which you put together, or at least something on a, basically not what you think would be the right price to pay. You need to base it on some numbers. Because running an event in the south is more expensive than running it further north. It'll cost you 400 or 500 quid to hire a village hall down in Surrey. It'll cost you 150 quid to do it up north. So there are different costs where you are in the country. So I think the biggest thing is when people come to me and say, I'm thinking of running an event this year, I say, why don't you do it next year? Why don't you cut yourself some slack and put it on the following year? And then go away and just do a little bit of research. I think the other thing is, and I hate to say it, but a lot of people, when they start out, try to design events which they would win at or do really well at. And so they don't. I think the important thing is to look at your market and is that market viable? So, there's a number of people over the years have designed events for elite competitors. Unless you're doing some kind of really top-end, high-end sponsored thing, like the Coastal Challenge or something like that, then you're not, that's not going to fund your event. So you need to think about the bigger market of
Normal
those people.
people.
Now, I was that person at the back of the pack, so I kind of understood that market. But I think many runners, and I don't think anyone in mind was saying Shane was there, Mike Jones was there. Those kind of people, there's a danger if they target that where
Mm.
they're at, they won't have a viable event, if you see what I mean. And
Yeah.
so, being able to create an event with the right cut-offs, that kind of stuff is important. Conversely, I think it's just tip it on the other side, certainly in the market. Mark Cockbain runs events with particularly strict cut-offs, or you look at obviously um, some of the events where the people are, it literally is about the last man standing. He's a very elite. It's designed around that, and actually getting to the start line or doing a lap or
Or your
whatever it
chains
is.
together.
Yes, exactly. I mean, bizarre concepts. But even then, I mean, I know Mark. Mark's done some of my sportifs, bizarrely, and he's got another job. He doesn't make his money from those events. Do you mean he has great fun doing them? But
Yeah.
I'm not sure he can't. There's no way
It must be more
anyone
of a
could.
hobby.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it depends where you're at as well. Are you trying to make a hobby out of this, or? And my concern is with those which do it as a hobby, is it tends to run for 3 or 4 years and then they get a bit fed up with it. They kind of resent the fact that they're spending so much time onto it, and then they stop doing it. And there's lots of those kind of events which have gone out there and done that, where they've done 2 or 3 years. It's kind of like it's taken up a lot more time than they expected. They're not getting any financial benefit, even from a very basic minimum wage point of view, and then they kind of feel like, actually, I'm not going to run this anymore. So, that's the one thing which I feel is important for us as a community, is that people run sustainable events, and a sustainable event is one which can keep running, and is not just. Even though like the heavily sponsored stuff which comes in 1 year and goes, that's not sustainable events. That's that's not.
Do you think it's harder now that, I mean, the scene seems to have exploded with events, and
Yes.
I think we're so constrained, not only with physical land, but also with, there are only 52 weekends in a year. So is there a sort of a natural sifting that just happens, that they come and go, and the good ones stay?
Okay, so a couple of things you said there. I mean, I've heard the kind of like the natural sifting kind of would over 10 years that the kind of, let's say, the chaff goes, but I don't. I think the problem is that I don't think that always works. Partly because it's constantly being fueled by people which want to do it as a hobby. They want to run in a race because they've got a passion for that area. They want to put an event on. They want to showcase what they do in their area, and they do it for 2 or 3 years, and then they kind of right, and that's enough type thing, and that kind of cycle keeps repeating. So those things keep filling in there. I think there's some areas which are growing tolerant. I think the Lake District is particularly one of them. If you go to Keswick in May, June, you might find 2 or 3 events running out of Keswick. It could be 2 or 3 ultra runs. There's often sportifs, that kind of stuff, and those communities are tremendously tolerant of the event industry. You could say we're bringing money in, but to be honest, if events weren't there, they'd still be full anyhow. So I don't think that really washes with them. They're just very good, and I've chatted to many of these people over the years, and I think I don't think the event community appreciates how tolerant some of the people are. Conversely, some of them, sometimes it does pop, and I can think of 1 or 2 places where people just said enough's enough. I don't want that anymore, type thing. I think the other thing to say, and I think is really important thing, is that a good event. What is a good event? And
that's a magic question.
I've seen many good events, amazing routes, well organized, not be successful. And I've also seen many events which are really top on their media, great website, branding, be successful. Yet actually, when you look at the route and even some of the admin on the day, it's just diabolical. Yet they're proved to be successful. And that is really harsh. But I can think of 2 or 3 events which are a success, but actually they're a disaster.
So,
So
why? What makes them a
well, I
success?
think, I hate to say it, but I think we're a bit shallow as people. We buy into those brands and we buy into that image,
Yeah.
and we we look at that photo or we look at that thing, and we kind of we want to be part of it, which is great. I mean, that's fine if you are providing that, but there are
So it's the
many
marketing,
events
really.
that are.
It's
Oh,
clever
totally.
marketing.
Yeah, yeah. That is the. I do think that marketing is really key to making events work, and getting it right. And I was never really great at it, but yeah, um, I was okay at it. Persistent, I suppose, is my way of doing things,
Well,
really.
and that's, certainly that's key. That's key. Just doing stuff regularly, eventually you get noticed for sure.
Yeah, but I don't. I think ultimately, I think successful events need some kind of marketing.
They've got a big,
That's
yeah, yeah.
they've got to push it, and even the more established older events, there's many events which are struggling and going by the wayside because they've they've assumed that everything will be okay. They can just put a Facebook post out there and it'll be fine,
Mm.
and it's just not working now, and it is sad to see because people kind of get frustrated with it. Um, and also price. I mean, there's many events out there which are really, really expensive, and you could see an event on the same route, um, and it'd be way less cheaper, but it's not successful. And a lot of that comes down to the branding, the stuff which goes around
Well,
it.
and reputation, presumably, perhaps, or
Yeah, I don't know. I think I still see. Yeah, I think you really have to get a real slamming online to, you know, and the other thing is that every race director makes their mistakes. So, you know,
yeah.
there's no race director out there who's got a halo running around the top of their head. I
Well,
can
don't be
promise you
afraid
that.
to make mistakes.
Yeah, and we've all made, and I think that's the thing. I can prove. I know most of them, and I've sat and I see behind that curtain on many event, and yeah, no race director should be throwing stones in glass houses as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, we're running out of time, I see. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna throw a few brief questions at you.
sure.
Pacers versus crew. What are your thoughts on those?
I mean, again, I think I've seen this over the years. I think that this is an interesting one. Pacers versus crew. I think both of them bring in a level of traffic to the event, which some of our more rural areas struggle with. And I think ultimately, from an event point of view, you don't get more entries. If anything, you limit the size of your event because you've got more traffic on the course type thing. And I think over the years, you've seen less and less of it here in the UK. It was the case in adventure racing. There was a lot of, you would have a support team and a vehicle would follow you around and type stuff like that. And that just doesn't really happen anymore. The stuff which goes on in the States, the events are a lot smaller. They're often restricted by permits. You don't tend to see that. I just also think that you having paces, you're limiting it to you're pretty much excluding international competitors because it
Right.
suddenly costs a lot more. If you're going to be competitive as an international competitor, you've got to bring a pacer along. You've got to find one, and then suddenly they go, "That's just I'm not going to be on a level playing field." And same with the crew. If you're
Mm.
Pavel coming from Czechoslovakia, or Ian Keith coming across from Ireland, or John Kelly coming from America, there's suddenly that the cost of them doing that event is suddenly gone up a lot more. So, but Arc of Attrition works really well. I'd say from a marketing point of view, you've got a personal PR company following every person around. And
Mm.
I know from tracking that the events where we've got supported runners, they get way more coverage than the ones without, because
Oh,
those
really?
individuals are promoting their runner to their friends and such like that. So yeah, from
Interesting.
that point.
Oh, very interesting. That's a good one. Um, Land access, permissions. I mean, that must be a really,
So that's getting harder. That's definitely getting harder. I think also the price is going up. I was talking to one event organizer here. He came into the office a bit frustrated, because Forest Commission now charge pretty much 20% of your income. And if you imagine the VAT man's taken 20% and the payment provider's taken 5%, and you've got a few coffees, he's all pretty much lost 50% of his income before he's actually got to the start line.
wow. Yeah.
So that ticket price for a trail event round a forestry, 50% of it's gone out the door before you've even done anything at all.
Yeah.
Nothing.
That's harsh, isn't it? And that's
Yeah.
got to be passed on to the runners, hasn't it?
Oh, totally. Certainly, either that or you're going to see less and less stuff going on in some of those places. So
Mm.
certainly, I know here in Grisdale that happened a number of years ago, and then there was loads of events, and then suddenly there was none. Yeah, that, and again, I think I'd come back to that budget thing right at the beginning, where people are having to promote their events. There's no point in putting your event out there, even getting the nod from Forestry Commission. You can run it unless you understand how much it's going to cost. National Trust has done some similar stuff in some places. It just tend to be a bit random.
Yes, that's confusing as well, isn't it? Because they're all different depending on where you are.
Yeah, and also, some of those organisations are putting their own events on, so they're in a funny kind of way. They're undercutting the other event organisers, because they're clearly not, that how that works. They'll do a bike ride, £5 or whatever it is, and they're not subject to the same kind of costs as an event organizer. But so it's a funny kind of world. You can't stop them. That's the way it goes. But yeah, so the economics of it is quite fascinating. But permissions generally, I think, just to be really aware is that I think a lot of event organisers get the permissions wrong. They make an assumption they've got a right to be there, and often they don't as an event, and they make those
Mm.
errors. And I've seen that conflict as a runner when you've got a landowner saying you're not coming this way type stuff. So it's
Yeah.
not pleasant.
No. Volunteers versus paid staff. I've started to come across this recently, where people are saying they're actually paying for what I would have always considered to be a volunteer manning a checkpoint or something. Have you come across that much? Do you think
Yeah, and I've mixed the two. So volunteers and paid staff. I think the rule I on the Itera, we used a lot of volunteers and we paid some people. And to be honest, without the volunteers, that event would not run. And there's many events which I can think of over the years, which if you paid the staff, the number of competitors doing it, they just wouldn't add up. The economics of those events don't add up.
No.
And so volunteers are key to making those events happen. Conversely, I also think that sometimes events use volunteers when actually they didn't really need to, and so they've got, I've got 200 volunteers on this event, and you sort of think, wow, really? Did you need that many? Do you mean it's like, you start looking at the ratios to participants to volunteers, think that's a bit excessive type thing. And I was at one event last year, there was just too many people around. It's just like it's obscene. You sort of think actually it's just not good. But on the Itera, the way which it worked was that if you're responsible for safety, I needed your qualification to do a particular task, like drive a safety boat or that kind of thing, then I would pay you for that role.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the volunteers, we gave them a small amount of money per day, which would cover them for their fuel, for their food. And then if we asked them to use their vehicle, because we had a lot of vans, then we'd pay them to use their vehicle. We didn't pay them to get to Oban because it just got silly with where people were coming from. And to be honest, if someone is going to come up from Bournemouth to Oban, I could lose one team entry on their fuel expenses. You know,
Yeah,
it just
yeah,
wasn't. And
yeah,
normally they're bringing somebody up. So that model worked on that event. Now, conversely, we've also done other stuff before where we've legs in a day, we were paying people a modest amount based on the amount of hours they worked. And we were getting a lot of the freelance community involved, which there is quite a lot of in the Lake District. And it actually works really well. There is definitely when I've been on both sides, my expectation of people who are paying is different from volunteers.
yes.
And I've got a higher expectation. If I'm paying somebody, I expect them to turn up on time,
Well,
to do all those
absolutely.
kind of things.
Yeah.
Whereas volunteers, it's a little bit trickier. Um, and you know, you're kind of contract with them. I struggle with that whole kind of contract type stuff and trying to bring in HR type approaches to volunteers. Always feels as if it sort of loses something at that point, because people generally want to be there because they want to have a bit of fun and enjoy the time. And as soon as it feels like a day at work, it just loses it a little bit. So, yeah, I know there's difficulties with that. And in terms of the law, it's quite clear volunteer is seen as an employee. So you can't duck that. You still need the right level of
Still
insurance.
need
You
to be
still
able
need
to look
to
after them. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think you can't duck that responsibility you've got for them. And also volunteers cost money. Even if they come up and even if you don't pay them, even if you don't cover their lunch or whatever it is, invariably there's you're going to have to pay something for them to be there. Free t-shirts, whatever
Or a race
you do,
entry and return or
there's going to be
whatever.
a cost. Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And you look at some of those events. There's a lot of event companies out there run that kind of credit scheme, and that's. I think that's an interesting dilemma. I think there's dynamics in that. I've been on a few events where you see people there because they want to get the free entry. Their motivation for being there is definitely different from those which are kind of more committed volunteers. They're
Mm.
a little bit more
Yes.
economical on their effort, do I say? And that they're there for themselves. But likewise, it can work, and who can deny? Somebody puts in a week's worth of work on a particular event, then they should have something back for it. And in terms of race interest, quite a good. And if you look at the maths behind it, often doesn't add up anyhow. So yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, I suppose with something like the spine, if it gives you a better chance of getting in, I mean, it must be, it's very hard to get in anyway, isn't it? So, um, maybe, well, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely is at the moment. I think that I think with many events, if you jump onto the spine, if you certainly jump onto the wait list for the spine, I think you probably would get in eventually. Um, yeah, I think I don't know. You'd have to talk to those guys, but I think yeah, that's definitely a popular one. That's an interesting event, which to be honest hasn't really done marketing and promotion over the years. It's historically never did marketing and promotion between their events. Has done a lot more now, certainly since Jenny's got on board and Chris and that. Yeah, they're obviously doing a little bit more, but certainly during the event, it's very big. During the event, bigger than other events actually. So yeah.
Well, thank you, thank you very much for your time. Sorry for the interruption. I think that's really interesting. Any last minute tips for anything? I'm trying to think what else we've not covered really for some poor new person who's now thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I won't come
I
up with
think there's something. People often ask me, why did I do it, or why do I do it? And I think for me, this kind of world, you meet some of the best people in the world. That their motivation for being there is such a leveler as ultra running. You can get people who clearly like fund managers to whoever somebody else who works in mechanic or whatever it is. Their income matters not when they're on the start line, and they're often the topic of conversation is not about the car or the TV. It's about what you do with life. And I just love that in the people which we do stuff with. And so to work with those people, to spend time with those people at events is, I can think of no better place to be. Yeah, I think and I think that's worth reminding. I think if you're in it for the money and want to run events because you think you could earn some money, then you really should go and look somewhere else. Don't. It just doesn't. Don't do it. I'm sure that's the same with RunUltra. So
Yeah, I'm not retiring anytime soon.
yeah, no, and I think that is hard because when you do see those posts on the social media saying, "Call, they must be making them in." I just don't see that anywhere. Do you mean? I've seen some people make some. The racers are putting a lot on the line over the years, and especially during COVID, there was a lot of people sinking a lot of money in and losing a lot of money.
Yeah, that was hard.
And yeah, that's hard. So I think if anybody who wants to put a race on, I will shake their hand. Do you mean? Because I just think that it requires a passion to be there to do it, and I think that whoever they are, that they should get people's respect. Really, I think that's worthy of a don the cap to those people. So yeah.
Oh, excellent. That's really good. Thank you so much. Thank you.